summer of 2025 had scorched California's Sierra Nevada foothills into a tinderbox, a land of golden grass and stoic pines, now fuel for an insatiable beast. It began in late July, a lightning strike splintering a drought-weary cedar, a camper's ember drifting on a wind too parched to relent. By August, those sparks had birthed wildfires that raged unchecked, swallowing canyons and spitting ash into a sky locked in perpetual dusk. The air thickened into a gritty veil, choking lungs and painting the sun a sullen orange, as if the heavens mourned the earth's unraveling. Grace Valley lay in the beast's path, a speck of a town cradled between rolling hills and the Feather River's dwindling banks. Its clapboard homes, sagging barns, and single stoplight Main Street bore the marks of resilience, folks who'd weathered floods and recessions with stubborn pride. Now they faced a fiery trial, unlike any before. Old Man Pritchard, a farmer with hands gnarled as his almond trees, stood on his porch each dawn, squinting at the horizon where flames flickered like devil's eyes. 40 years, he muttered to his dog Rusty, and it's never come this close. His wife had packed their Chevy with photos and her mother's silver, but Pritchard lingered, torn between roots and the ember-laden wind. Down the road, the Garcia family fled without hesitation. Javier loaded their rust-pocked pickup with suitcases, a toddler's crib, and a cooler of tamales, while Elena hushed little Sophia's wails. "We'll be back," he said, though his eyes betrayed doubt as they rattled toward Sacramento. Others stayed. Mrs. Hensley, 83 and widowed, sat in her rocker with her late husband's Bible, murmuring, "The Lord will provide." Sheriff's deputies roamed with megaphones, voices hoarse. "Mandatory evacuation. Pack what you need and go." But Grace Valley's heart beat stubborn, and not all heeded the call. The smoke arrived first, a creeping thief slipping under doors, stinging eyes raw. It carried charred pine and despair, coating throats with a taste no water could rinse. By mid-August, the fires were 10 miles out, their glow a taunting promise on the ridges. Embers rode the wind, sparking spot fires that flared and died, or didn't. Townsfolk gathered what mattered. Quilts stitched by grandmothers, a child's stuffed bear, a rifle from a father's war, and debated over coffee at the rusty spur. "Heard it jumped the river," one said. "Won't stop till it takes us," another replied. Fear hung heavy, but hope flickered, anchored in the whitewashed walls of the First Church of Divine Grace. The church stood at the town's edge, its steeple a defiant finger against the smoky sky. For 32 years, Reverend Ezekiel Thomas had been its voice, a shepherd whose sermons wove fire and brimstone warnings with unshakable trust. As the wildfires closed in, his pews swelled. Farmers, widows, skeptics who hadn't prayed since Easter, drawn by his steady baritone. "Trust in the Lord," he'd say, hands gripping the oak pulpit. "He walks with us through the flames." To many, he was a rock in a world ablaze. To others, a riddle wrapped in faith. But as embers fell like rain, his presence loomed larger than the fires, a beacon or a warning, depending on who you asked. Ezekiel Thomas was 67, though his broad shoulders and firm handshake suggested a man who'd wrestled time and won. His hair, once jet black, had turned a distinguished silver, swept back from a forehead etched with contemplation and loss. He lived alone in a bungalow behind the church, a modest box of clapboard and memory. Its walls held shelves of books, scripture from Genesis to Revelation, Augustine's Confessions, John Donne's Holy Sonnets, and a single-framed photo of Abigail, his wife. Her smile, frozen in 1990's Kodachrome, was all he had left. She died in 98, her car spinning off Highway 70 in a rain-slicked collision with a drunk driver's truck. The loss had broken Thomas, a jagged wound that bled until faith stitched it shut. Not the tepid belief of his youth, but a fierce trust forged in grief's furnace. That faith defined him. Every Sunday, he climbed the pulpit steps, black robes swaying, and preached to a flock hungry for meaning. He loved the Old Testament, Noah's Ark, Daniel in the lion's den. But as the wildfires loomed, he fixed on Daniel 3, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego cast into Nebuchadnezzar's furnace. "The king saw a fourth figure in the flames," he'd say, gray eyes alight, walking with them, untouched by fire, an angel of the Lord or the Lord himself. God intervenes, not as we expect, but as we need. His voice was steady as the stained glass, Moses parting the sea, glowing faintly through the haze, casting smoky light onto the pews. The wildfires fueled his latest sermon, the refiner's fire, blending Malachi's purifying flames with Daniel's furnace. When the heat comes, he'd preached last Sunday, look for the fourth, the holy presence that delivers. Thomas wasn't flawless. He drank coffee black and scalding, forgetting it until it sat cold beside his Bible. He misplaced his glasses weekly, finding them atop his head, and he'd boarded his windows as ember showers rattled Grace Valley. His neighbors knew his kindness, sitting with the sick until dawn, shoveling snow for the elderly, slipping a 20 into a struggling mother's purse with a murmured, "God bless." Sarah Jenkins, next door with her 6-year-old son, Tommy, called him the absent-minded saint. A nurse with a pragmatist's heart, she'd lost faith when her husband walked out, leaving her with a toddler and a mortgage. She admired Thomas's goodness, his prayers over Tommy's asthma, his small hand in Thomas's grip, but worried his furnace fixation blinded him to the real fires at their door. The wildfires reshaped his routine. Mornings he knelt before the altar, the church silent save for the creak of pews and sirens' wail. Stained glass cast fractured light as he prayed for rain, strength, and Grace Valley's deliverance, whispering, "Send the fourth, Lord." Afternoons he wrote "The Refiner's Fire," his pen scratching. As with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, God's hand appears in the blaze. Evenings he stood on his porch, watching embers drift like fireflies, igniting grass before volunteers stamped them out. The smoke thickened, but he stayed. "God has kept me here for a purpose," he told Maria Lopez, a widow whose husband had faded from cancer. She'd sought comfort, her toddler tugging her skirt, and he'd prayed, hands warm on her shoulders, voice a balm. "The fourth will walk with us." Not all leaned on him. Harold Callahan, a mechanic since the Nixon era, scoffed at Thomas's sermons. Miracles? Fourth figures? He'd grumble at the rusty spur, oil-stained fingers tapping the bar. "If God's sending angels, why's my roof ash-covered?" He hadn't entered a church since his wife Ellie died of pneumonia, but he attended Thomas's potlucks, piling casserole on his plate, muttering thanks. Thomas never pushed. "Faith comes when it's ready," he'd say, smiling. By mid-September, the fires were 5 miles out, embers falling like a plague. The sky was a bruised twilight, the air ash and heat. Thomas's sermon notes grew urgent, his pen pressing harder. "The furnace is here. Where is the fourth?" He planned it for Sunday, if Grace Valley stood. But on a Tuesday afternoon, as he bent over his desk, lost in Daniel's words, the wind shifted. Embers from the ridges peppered his bungalow's roof, one slipping through a cracked window to smolder on a curtain. Smoke curled unnoticed beneath the study door. Sarah Jenkins was in her yard, pruning roses with rusty shears, when the wind turned bitter. Ash flecked her hair, and a faint, acrid scent cut through the wildfire's haze. Smoke, close and fresh. She squinted, heart lurching as gray tendrils snaked from Thomas's bungalow, seeping from the roof and kitchen window. No flames yet, just the whisper of danger. "Tommy, stay by the fence!" she snapped, dropping the shears and sprinting to his door. Her son, small and wiry with his father's curls, coughed into his sleeve, eyes wide. She pounded the wood. "Reverend Thomas?" No answer. Panic clawed her as she twisted the knob, unlocked, and pushed inside. Smoke stung her eyes, a thin haze rolling from the kitchen where an ember had landed on a dish rag near the stove, smoldering but not yet ablaze. The roof creaked faintly, embers nesting above. She stumbled through, finding him in his study, hunched over his sermon. "The fourth walks with us," scrawled in ink, pen in hand, oblivious. "Reverend Thomas," she shouted, voice raw. "There's smoke, embers got in, we've got to get out before it spreads." He looked up, gray eyes calm. "My child, don't worry. I'm a man of faith. God will send the fourth to save me, as he did for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I trust his angel in the flames." Sarah froze, disbelief warring with fear. "It's not a story, it's starting now. Please come with me." She grabbed his arm, tugging his sweater, but he pulled back, serene, settling into his chair, gazing at his notes. The smoke thickened, a warning growl in the air. "Tommy's outside, I can't stay," she pleaded, coughing as it clawed her throat. Thomas smiled, gentle but firm. "Go to your son, Sarah. The fourth is coming. God's with me." Tommy's wheezing pierced the haze. Tears streaked her face as she stumbled back, scooping her boy into her arms and staggering outside. She fumbled her phone, dialing 911. "Smoke at 14 Church Lane," she gasped. "Embers, he won't leave, hurry!" She sank to the grass, holding Tommy, praying he'd see sense. Minutes later, The smoke darkened, and a crackle sounded as the dish rag ignited, flames licking the kitchen counter. The fire spread to the ground floor, chewing through linoleum and wooden cabinets. Thomas, undisturbed, gathered his sermon notes and Bible, retreating to the living room as the blaze crept closer. The Grace Valley Fire Department roared in, sirens slicing the dusk. Captain Miguel Rodriguez, a wiry man with scars from a dozen blazes, leapt from the engine. "Ground floor's going. Ladder up," he barked, eyeing the flames merging with the wildfire's edge. Rodriguez burst through the front door, smoke curling around him. "Reverend, it's burning. Come with me now." Thomas stood by the sofa, Bible in hand, flames licking the hallway behind him. "Captain," he said, voice steady, "I'm waiting for the fourth. God's angel will deliver me." Rodriguez swore. "No angel's coming. Take my hand." But Thomas turned, climbing the stairs as the fire roared. Rodriguez retreated, coughing as the ground floor buckled. "Stubborn fool," he muttered, guilt gnawing as his team hosed the blaze in vain. The fire climbed, tongues of flame licking the staircase. Thomas reached the second floor, entering his bedroom, praying aloud, "Lord, send the fourth as you did in Babylon." Smoke choked the air and the floorboards groaned. Rodriguez's team propped a ladder to the window. "Reverend," he shouted, climbing. "Take the ladder. It's your way out." Through the glass, Thomas knelt, serene. "I trust in God's presence, Captain." The window shattered under heat, and Rodriguez recoiled as flames surged. Thomas rose, climbing to the attic as the second floor glowed orange. In the attic, he knelt again, embers raining through the roof. The fire roared below, a furnace consuming all. A news chopper hovered, David Carter at the controls, lowering a rope ladder. "Reverend Thomas," he boomed. "Grab it, we'll lift you." Thomas looked up, robe billowing. "My son, I wait for the fourth. God's way, God's time." The ladder swayed, but he prayed on. David pulled back as the roof blazed. Flames engulfed the attic, a wall of heat and light. Thomas's voice faltered, smoke filling his lungs. He slumped, passing out as the fire claimed him. David's feed broadcast live, Grace Valley watching in horror. Maria Lopez clutched her daughter, praying through tears. At the rusty spur, Harold Callahan stared, beer untouched, muttering, "Fools waiting for angels." The house collapsed, a fiery tomb, and a gasp swept the town, faith and frustration colliding. Thomas awoke in light, not heat, a vast, shimmering expanse where pain vanished and peace reigned. Heaven stretched before him, a presence warm and infinite. God's voice, gentle thunder, greeted him. "Lord," Thomas cried, joy and sorrow mingling, "I served you, trusted you. Why didn't you send the fourth to save me?" "My child," God replied, "I did. I sent Sarah to warn you at the smoke's first whisper. I sent Rodriguez to pull you from the ground floor's flames. I sent David to lift you from the roof. The fourth walked with you, not as an angel, but in them." Visions bloomed, Sarah's frantic face, Rodriguez's outstretched hand, David's ladder swaying. Thomas saw Abigail, too, nodding as if she'd known. "I sought a miracle in the flames," he whispered, "and missed the ones you sent." "Faith isn't waiting for angels," God said, lifting him. "It's seeing my presence in the hands I move. You looked for Babylon's fourth, but I gave you Grace Valley's." Thomas bowed, repentant. "Forgive me, Lord. Let me share this, to teach that your help wears human faces." "Go and tell." God's light enveloped him. The wildfires ravaged Grace Valley into October, but rains doused them at last. Thomas's bungalow was ash, a scar beside the singed church. His death split the town. Some hailed him a martyr, others a lesson. Sarah rebuilt her life, faith softening into trust in people. Tommy's laugh, neighbors' hands. Maria took his sermon to heart, sharing it at a relief effort. He waited for the fourth, but we were it. Callahan donated tools, gruffly adding, "No angels, just us." They rebuilt homes, trust, a community woven from loss. By 2035, Grace Valley rose anew. Green hills, rebuilt homes, a plaque where Thomas's house stood. He sought the fourth, we became it. His tale spread, a parable of faith and action. Churches preached it, God's miracles are human hands. Schools taught it, see the help before you. The wildfires faded, but Thomas's lesson burned bright. The fourth walks in us all.